Stuart, you can go ahead. We're live. I don't know why it didn't welcome everybody, but you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to the first in a series of 6 APHIS APHIS team webinars. I'm Stuart Schmidt, a member of the NCB FAA Regulatory Agencies Committee. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us for today's presentation. All attendees are in listen-only mode. However, questions may be submitted by typing them into the question box on the webinar toolbar. Please be sure to use the question box and not the chat box, as the chat box will not be monitored. We will address questions at the end, time permitting. The webinar will also be recorded and posted to both the NCB FAA and USDA APHIS websites, and a link will be provided to all who register. The NCB FAA NEI is excited to be partnering with the APHIS ACE team to present this series of 6 webinars as we move into the next phase of electronic filing for APHIS core entries. This initial webinar focuses on the APHIS PGA message set in general and will serve as the foundation for the series. Subsequent webinars will focus on specific APHIS regulated products, fruits and vegetables, animal products, miscellaneous and processed products, cut flowers, and seeds not for planting. As we move through the presentation, each speaker will provide a brief self-introduction. However, over the course of the series, we hope you will become best friends with each and every one of them. We have a lot to cover, so without further delay, I will get the presentation started and turn it over to the APHIS ACE team. Ricky, please begin.
Hello, and thank you all for having us for this webinar and the APHIS Core Message Set. My name is Richard Leshin. I am the APHIS ACE Program Manager, and with me is, this is Vivek Kamath. I'm also with APHIS, specifically with the veterinary services side. And on the phone, we also have members of our technical team, Brett Miller and Marco Flores and Jeff Beeman. The Automated Commercial Environment, ACE, is the system the U.S. government uses to process imports and exports. Importers can now use ACE to submit APHIS-required import data for APHIS-regulated products. In 2016, In 2016, USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service published the APHIS Core Message Set, making it possible for importers and brokers to submit APHIS-required import data through the Automated Commercial Environment ACE. This presentation will focus on an overview of the data entry process for APHIS Core PGA Message Set, the resources available for this data entry, and some of the frequently asked questions. This presentation will not focus on commodity-specific topics. Commodity-specific presentations will be available separately. This presentation focuses on ACE data entry by filers who are also custom brokers. Self-filers can also follow this guidance. This presentation also assumes that the audience is familiar with ACE terminology and associated data entry methods, such as the ability to submit scanned documents via the Document Image System, DIS. On February 3rd, 2020, APHIS published a Federal Register notice requesting comment for the next 30 days on the enforcement of HTS flags for APHIS Core that will be fully implemented on August 3rd, 2020. We are currently in the transition period, and filers may enter ACE information during this period, may enter APHIS Core PGA message set data during this transition period, but will need to enter it starting August 3rd, 2020. While ACE changes some of the things about how you submit certain import data, many processes stay the same. Importers or brokers using ACE must provide APHIS Core PGA data at or before arrival. If not using ACE, paper documentation must be provided at or before arrival to CBP Agriculture. Low-value shipments, such as those subject to Section 321, known as de minimis, are still subject to APHIS Core requirements. Filers may utilize the entry type 86 to submit APHIS Core PGA data through ACE for such shipments. Importers still need to obtain all necessary documents, such as permits and animal certificates or plant health certificates. Official government-to-government certificates, such as CITES, phytosanitary, or health sanitary certificates, will continue to be collected in paper format. CBP Agriculture will continue to hold, inspect, and review shipment information for most APHIS-regulated commodities. Propagative plant material will be referred to an APHIS Plant Protection and Quarantine Plant Inspection Station. Live animals, including germplasm and embryos, will be referred to an APHIS Veterinary Services Port Veterinarian for inspection. Please remember, your commodity may be regulated by other federal, state, and local agencies. Meeting APHIS import requirements does not confer or imply that the commodity has met the requirements of any federal, state, or local agencies. For example, many edible meat products may be restricted by APHIS Veterinary Services and USDA Food Safety Inspection Service. Both APHIS and FSIS requirements must be met for such products. Filers must properly classify commodities, including use of appropriate HTS codes. APHIS Core Message Set guidance and application of proper regulatory requirements rely on proper classification of commodities. For additional guidance regarding HTS codes and their use, please contact CBP directly. Most APHIS issued permits are now available to CBP through a direct link from APHIS to ACE, and paper permits are no longer required to be submitted by the filer. However, the permit number must be submitted in the message set in order to ensure the correct permit can be found by the ACE system and properly associated with the shipment. Any symbols such as dashes or letters within the permit number must be included. There is one type of APHIS veterinary permit that does not match, and the details of this exception will be described in a later presentation. APHIS will continue to need certificate numbers reported to the best of the filer's ability. APHIS understands the format of the number changes depending upon issuer and issuing country. Certificate numbers will be used to match the original paper document with the submitted PGA message set. The APHIS Core Message Set includes the following APHIS programs: Plant Protection and Quarantine, Agency Program Code APQ, Veterinary Services, Agency Program Code AVS, Biological Regulatory Services, Agency Program Code ABS, and Animal Care Agency Program Code AAC. The respective PG-10 category types for each program describes the types of commodities regulated and can be seen in the table on the presentation. Each category type code series are further refined into subcategories, commodity categories, that identify regulated commodities. In general, regulated commodities have APHIS-required licenses, permits, certificates, and others, LPCOs, documents. The APHIS Core Supplemental Trade Guide is primarily designed for filers that report the message set on behalf of importers. The guide is a job aid aimed at separating the operational data entry concepts from the technical aspect of the message set. The APHIS guide includes guidance on tariff code flagging, disclaim codes, LPCOs, agency processing code, and commodity category types. There are also many frequently asked questions and the corresponding answers. APHIS intends to update this guide periodically. The guide has detailed guidance on HTS flagging and disclaim codes for APHIS Core, and this can be found in Section 1, Disclaim and HTS Flagging Guidance, PG-01. For example, if a shipment does not require LPCOs for APHIS, and the HTS code is flagged AQ1, data may be required, then you can disclaim using code A, which is not regulated by this agency, or code B, data is not required per agency guidance. With that being said, filers may choose to submit message sets for AQ1 flagged commodities that do not have LPCOs as a condition of entry if they believe it will facilitate with the clearance and movement of the shipment. It may be beneficial to provide clearing inspecting officers with more granular information if the commodity is regulated and routinely inspected, even if LPCOs are not required. The trade guide also has a detailed correlation table showing which LPCOs are required, what format to submit them, paper, DIS, or message set. Filers can refer to this section of the trade guide to determine what DIS document code to use for an APHIS-required form. Please note that APHIS DIS codes should be used for the message set for submitting DIS documents for APHIS. For example, if an importer indicated their commodity was classified under a certain HTS code, filers can use the trade guide section H, Harmonized Tariff Code Master Correlation Table, to obtain guidance on the commodity category needed for that commodity. Commodity category, in turn, may provide information on the agency program which regulates the material and which agency processing codes are applicable. The information in the trade guide section H is based on APHIS's interpretation of the Harmonized Tariff Schedule published by the U.S. International Trade Commission, including the review of any chapter notes. For example, Chapter 5 of the Tariff Schedule indicates that this chapter does not cover edible products other than guts, bladders, and stomachs of animals, whole pieces thereof, and animal blood, liquid or dried. Chapter 5 has a code starting with 0506 that is for bones. However, APHIS would not expect this tariff code for bone to be used for edible bones that are used to make soup stock, bone stock. Lastly, filers or importers are required to submit APHIS data for APHIS-regulated commodities where an LPCO exists, regardless of the tariff code flagging. The APHIS Core Message Set Implementation Guide is designed to provide a comprehensive explanation of the data structures and formats found within the APHIS PGA message set. While the guide includes technical requirements, there's practical guidance available as well. This slide lists examples of guidance available. So some examples include, there are many different ways to consume the information. Our team has taken the time to develop text, tables, and diagrams for those that may prefer one mode of review versus another. There's detailed lists of error codes. There's example message sets. There's example forms with data element mapping. So when documents are submitted to brokers, data can be submitted correctly. For example, filers may find business rule diagrams useful in understanding APHIS Core PGA data requirements. There are global business rule diagrams, as well as diagrams specific to each agency program. These business rules are provided as text and also incorporated into the full message set examples in the implementation guide. As stated before, there are full grid examples of message sets for certain APHIS commodities, including text descriptions of the data entry and form mapping. Filers may find these as useful references when submitting data for real shipments. The implementation guide includes the full list of technical rules that apply for APHIS Core Message Set. These rules describe the error codes that filers may receive, a description of that error, and a potential solution to resolve that error. When you receive an APHIS Core reject or warning for your entry, you may be able to look up the source of the error using these technical rule statements. Your ABS software provider may also have additional details. In the screenshot, for example, if you receive error code PI7, that would refer to this global rule APH-002. The rule means that if you're filing APHIS message set and fail to provide an intended use code, the message would be rejected. Lastly, the APHIS filers may refer to the ACE Appendix PGA for details regarding APHIS Core specific codes and definitions. Please note that the ACE Appendix PGA is maintained by CBP and regularly updated in collaboration with APHIS and other PGAs. For example, filers can use the trade guide to determine what category codes, APHIS category codes, may apply to a given tariff code, and then use the Appendix PGA to read the full description of the APHIS category code. All these resources that we've mentioned are available through our APHIS ACE website. In addition, APHIS Core Message Set questions can be sent to our email address, ace.itds@usda.gov. Please be sure to provide us with screenshots, error codes, and any other relevant information. The APHIS ACE website links to many resources, including guidance on, it links to many things, including the CBP appendices, the DIS implementation guide, the DIS forms eligibility list. In addition, the APHIS ACE website lists any exemptions on filing the message set and a list of entry types where APHIS Core flagging will be enforced. If you have any import eligibility questions, such as does APHIS require an LPCO for importing a commodity, these questions should be referred to the APHIS-specific program that regulates the commodity. Resources for contacting APHIS regarding such import admissibility questions can be found on our Import-Export webpage or by contacting our Customer Service Center. It is extremely challenging for our APHIS ACE help desk to provide import admissibility information. Thus, we strongly encourage you to contact the APHIS programs directly for a timely response. So that concludes the presentation that we have for this first in the series, and we'll send it back to Stuart for any questions that we may have received.
All right, great. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. Certainly made a lot of things more clear for me, as I'm sure it did for many of our members. We do have several questions in the hopper here. We've also received many questions regarding can I receive a copy of the slides? And just as a reminder for those that may have missed the very beginning, that these the slide decks and this presentation has been recorded and will be posted for everyone to access. So the first question that I have relates to clarifying agency guidance. So there, Richard, you used the term per agency guidance. So the question says, does this mean a specific email from USDA, or is it something more general?
I have an answer for that. Just give me 1 minute to look it up. So yes, we don't have any specific examples listed in our trade guide, but this examples would be including emails saying that some commodity or some material is, some of the words you may hear are unrestricted. We'll cover some examples during the commodity specific webinars, but one example I can give you is cheese, hard cheese that has no liquid and no meat for APHIS Veterinary Services. That is technically an animal product, but hard cheese is unrestricted, meaning proving that it is what it is, cheese, is enough. So perhaps in that example, data is not required per agency guidance would be applicable if somebody had a large shipment of cheese. There are other, again, we'll cover this probably during the animal products. There are some website listed guidance for things that do not require an import permit. Some of them do not require any LPCO. Some require other types of LPCOs that are not permits. So those that require no LPCO could be considered data is not required per agency guidance when, and that guidance is posted on our agency website.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question relates to the eCert program, similar that would be available for Australia. And if there is no original meat certificate, should this be annotated on the chart that you showed?
Yes, so I am aware of that Australia, New Zealand eCert that's available for certain meat products. At this time, I believe the extract of those certificates is still supposed to be presented in paper to ports of arrival. So that is, those electronic certificates do not match in ACE as the permits do. So proof of the certificate printout should be presented for APHIS purposes. As an aside, I do know that FSIS, being a separate PGA, does receive those fully electronically. But for APHIS purposes, those would need to be presented as paper. I will make a note that for our trade guide for the next version, we will try to make a note of the Australia, New Zealand unique situation.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. The another question I have might be a little easier than the first two are, do you anticipate issuing another version of the IG in 2020, or do you believe this is currently final?
So IG is, I don't think ever will be final. There's always something that we will find either error or something we can improve. So I know we're always working on a next version. I can't say necessarily it will be in 2020. We are, as always, working on some technical changes. So we will look for technical changes to match up with releases of the next versions of the IG.
Okay, great, good. That was the answer I anticipated. So next question relates to FIDO certificates and original required to be surrendered. Are there any circumstances where an original FIDO certificate is not required?
If a phytosanitary certificate is required for the importation of goods, then we would need the original phytosanitary certificate that goes along with that.
Okay.
If the person asking the question has a specific situation that they could share that would help us answer the question more clearly, we'd certainly welcome that.
Okay, thank you. Another question I have is the product code number really conditional? And if so, what are the conditions and where can we get a reasonably sized download of the possible codes?
Sorry. So the implementation guide, for each data element that is included for the APHIS Core Message Set has an introduction describing the element and whether it's conditional or not conditional. And those that are conditional, it does describe the conditions. Brett, if you're on, I'm unsure that when someone is referring to the product code, which element that is. But as a general answer, if for conditions, almost all of those are listed in the introduction of the elements for each element on our implementation guide. Some of them are also enforced through technical rules, which are also listed in the implementation guide. If I will try to look up our guide very quickly. I'm having an issue here, but if the person asking the question has, if it's not available in the guide, or if they have another specific question, they can email us and we'll be happy to respond with more detail.
Yeah, and Vivek, I can add a little bit to that. This is Brett. I'm the technical lead for the APHIS message set, one of the also a coordinator for data management and analysis for APHIS. In the product code number that they're talking about is in PG02. Those product codes, we give 3 places they can find those product codes that we accept. We accept the global product classification, the GS1. We accept taxonomic serial number and United Nations product codes. The reason it's conditional isn't necessarily because of those codes. It's because there is one instance, and Vivek, this might jog your memory. There is one instance on that when there is an APHIS assigned number found on the 2006 permit, that specific case is required where you put the product code number, not those 3 that I just mentioned from GS1, TSN, and United Nations. It's an APHIS one, and that one is where it's conditional. We need the number for that one. So I think that's what they're talking about.
Thanks for jumping in, Brett. I appreciate it very much. A couple questions, kind of a repeat here, but since we've got additional questions, I'll bring those up. And these are related to de minimis. So we understand that there is no de minimis value and that any APHIS regulated product requires reporting. Is the entry type 86 going to be available to use in lieu of making a complete entry?
Yes, we encourage filers to use entry type 86 if they're in the de minimis, if they're available for de minimis. We are accepting that now through the test that is currently ongoing with CBP.
All right, thank you. Then I have another question asking for clarification on the August 3rd date and what that really means. Will additional HTS numbers be flagged for reporting, or does that mean that the APHIS flagged HTS numbers will need to be declared?
So on August 3rd, if you're filing a entry through ACE, APHIS will require, based upon the flagging, a message set or disclaim. So yes, if an HTS flags for APHIS Core Message Set after August 3rd, they will need to file a message set or a disclaim.
Yeah, and to elaborate on that, this is Brett again. In other words, right now when you're filing, you can bypass those flags and not file anything, even a disclaim. You will not be able to bypass that once the flags are enforced.
All right, back to a technical question here. So on in the APHIS description on page 135, they talk about unit of measures and the APHIS code, and must use the units of measure that are contained in the appendix PGA. But the business rule diagram somewhat conflicts with that, saying that there's a limited subset of the entire APHIS or the entire appendix PGA that might be available. So which is correct for reporting? Is the entire appendix PGA appropriate, or should we limit it to the subset?
You want me to do that one too, guys? Yeah, so the appendix PGA has the APHIS list of units of measure in the appendix PGA, meaning you find it in the appendix PGA under the title APHIS units of measure. And so that's the units of measure we're referring to, the ones that are listed under the header of APHIS units of measure. Stuart, did that answer the question, you think?
I believe it did, yes. All right. So an interesting question here from a carrier perspective. So today we're talking about brokers in the PGA message set. And so I think it's fair to ask this. The question relates to the manifest filers. Is there any change for manifest filers?
There's no change for manifest filers. You will still need to file manifest as appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Again, the answer I anticipated. For commodities that do not require permits, will we have to fill out and report APHIS core data? And
So,
I'll expand that. Let me expand it to include if it doesn't require a permit, certificate, or license.
Right. So I believe we received this question before. So the disclaim guidance would take effect there. So for the flags, for HTS codes that are flagged, AQ1 data may be required. The filer has an option, disclaim or submit the message set. There is the list of mandatory data elements for APHIS is quite short. It depends on which agency program is being used for submitting, being declared for submitting the message set. So for AQ1, that's the two options: disclaim or submit a truncated message set. For HTS codes that are flagged AQ2, meaning data is required, of course, there's unfortunately no disclaim option. So a message set must be submitted, which is usually that truncated message set. The full list of mandatory and conditional elements are in the implementation guide. I believe it's a total of around 40 individual elements. Now, it does sound like a lot. However, please note that for many entity information, the name is one element versus the phone number versus the address or address line 1 and 2. So it sounds like a big number, but it's just the information that's split into multiple elements. So there is the truncated message set. I'll give a hint for everybody for the animal products. I know that this question has come up for our trade with Canada. So I'm looking to have an example of such or a list of the truncated message set for AVS animal products. available. So please look forward to that at a future webinar.
All right, thank you. Another question. It appears as though the trade guide correlates the HTS codes with the appropriate program codes. If they are all indeed a one-to-one correlation, why would APHIS not assume the program code and require it to be transmitted? It just seems redundant, was the comment.
We'll take that under consideration. I don't know if we have a perfect answer for you right now, but we'll take a look into that and see if it's possible.
Okay, great. Yeah, if it is a one-to-one for 100% of the time, that we can either program it on our side, or probably would be better if it was a centralized one, though. Then the next question is kind of an interesting question. So if an importer forgets to renew their permit and the PGA message set gets submitted, is that going to create an automatic reject, or is there a workaround in order to process that particular shipment?
Sorry, Stuart, could you repeat the last half of your question? You said, is there a workaround for what?
So that the shipment can be processed, or will it just be rejected and a permit application required, and once issued, then they can resubmit?
I'm not an expert on the match feature, and Brett, after I respond, maybe if you have anything to add, you can add it. But as far as operationally, if the permit is required as a condition of import and it's invalid, meaning it's expired, I will say that for veterinary services animal products, there is a quote on hold process that someone can go through. It's not a guarantee of shipment release. That is a method for bringing shipments into compliance that may allow, post-arrival permit application and processing. I honestly don't know for the rest of APHIS if that's even an option. This may be, whoever asked that question, if they deal with a specific permit unit within APHIS, such as the plant permitting or fruits and vegetables permitting, that may be a question to pose directly to that unit, whether they would even entertain post-arrival permit renewal and shipment release, subsequent shipment release. But for animal products, the on hold is one. As far as the matching, rejecting because it's expired, I don't know the details of that. So Brett?
Yeah, I can answer that. So we're not going to enforce yet the matching feature for the permit. That's going to stay the same. It's going to be officer reviewed, so it won't be automatic if there's a expired match, in the system. The officer is going to take a look at that and then talk to the importer's brokers about either getting the correct copy from the importer directly, or having the importer work through the permitting office to obtain an updated copy or updated permit that would be then given directly to the officer rather than in an electronic means. So there's not going to be an enforcement outright of a validation against that as of yet. So for now, that's not anything to worry about.
Okay, perfect. The PGA message set uses a generic term of LPCO, license, permit, certificates, and other. So is there anything that USDA APHIS would have that would fall under the other category, or are we just generally concerned with permits and certificates, licenses?
The O for the LPCO other, in version 4.9 of the implementation guide, we did clarify that to include things that are not certificates and not permits, such as manufacturer statements. These are most commonly associated with animal products. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned guidelines for importation that are posted on APHIS's website. So certain commodities that may contain animal origin material can be imported without a veterinary import permit. However, they may need to be accompanied by a manufacturer producer statement making some claim about the commodity, such as that it was derived only from non-livestock species. That's just an example, but some of those quote other documents are considered as the part of the O for the LPCO. So manufacturer statements, producer statements, shipper statements.
Excellent answer. Okay, kind of a basic blocking and tackling question here. Will the brokerage community and self-filers receive a may proceed from USDA when transmitting a disclaim?
Yes, the brokerage community, when filing a disclaim, should receive a may proceed message from APHIS. However, CBP Agriculture will continue to perform their actions and hold as necessary.
All right. Another question, first question related to FTZ. So for shipments to be admitted to an FTZ, will the transmission of the message set be required? The FTC data set does not have the ability to send PGA data. So I think the question really means that is the data required at the time of admission or at the time of entry?
Give us 1 minute for that.
Okay.
For FTZs at this time, APHIS will not flag FTZ entry types, but will require documentation be presented to CBP Agriculture at arrival. Because our regulations are required at arrival, at or before arrival, and the way that the ACE system is developed currently, we cannot ask for the documentation at arrival and then again at the entry. So at this time, FTZs will just present their documentation to CBP Agriculture for admissibility at arrival. When E214 comes online through CBP, we will require a message set for FTZ entries. I think that, yeah, what we've understood, there's a future capability that CBP is developing to have the E214 FTZ admission have the capability to have PGA data attached to it. So at that point, we would be enforcing that. But I believe the entry type for consumption out of a foreign trade or FTZ is type 06, and that's the one that we're not flagging for message set. And more guidance on the entry types and their requirements will be posted on the APHIS ACE website.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that was pretty clear. But in a semi-related question here, there's a question that talks about data for in-bond moves. Now, we just talked about having APHIS requirements at the first port of entry, first port of arrival filed. So if a for an inbound move, there's no opportunity, I don't believe, for a filer to file the APHIS data and still move the cargo inbound. That the first port of arrival rule and entry is going to be in effect.
We have seen a time where someone filed an inbound and the entry at the same time. The entry was then put on a pending position, and we were able to see the APHIS Core Message Set. So our understanding is it can be done concurrently and still allow for the inbound movement after the message set's been filed. But our flagging won't be able to enforce that. CBP Agriculture will enforce that on our behalf.
Okay, and as I'm reading the question again, I realize an important piece of information that I omitted, and that this is for goods that are they're for transportation and exportation. So goods coming in and just transiting through the U.S. So
in those cases, we won't be requiring a message set, but they will still need to provide their transit permits to the CBP Agriculture specialists for their goods, if required.
Yeah, so in that particular instance, it doesn't sound like it's going to change from today's model.
Yes, that's correct. There is no capability to transmit on a transportation and exportation bond. So they'll continue to submit, as they currently do, the transit permit and the documentation as required by APHIS to CBP Agriculture.
Okay. And one other question in relation to a possible conflict of agency requirements where, in this case, the example uses Fish and Wildlife, which would have perhaps a designated required port of entry for a same commodity that may be regulated by USDA APHIS. And the first port of arrival is not the permit arrival port for Fish and Wildlife. So that we have one agency saying make an entry at the port of arrival. We have another agency stating that my permit, and I have to move this to Chattanooga, Tennessee for entry for Fish and Wildlife. So in that particular instance, would you recommend following that inbound transit move that we just talked about, or is there some other methodology to handle that?
If whoever asked that question could email us, I think we would have to look at that a little bit more. That's not a conflict that I've heard of previously. I did hear the word entry there, and our APHIS requirements apply at arrival regardless of whether it's not necessarily based on the entry process. The customs port of entry may not be the same as the port of arrival. And with the question mentioning Fish and Wildlife, I don't know if their process for imported commodities relies on the customs entry location or arrival location. So in the question that was brought up, if whoever asked that question could email us the details, I think we could provide a more detailed response.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's fairly rare, but it may be possible. I've got a lot of questions here related to commodity specific questions. So those questions that have been asked that are commodity specific, please attend the appropriate webinar and ask those specific questions at that time. There is another question here regarding it specifically mentions perishable entries, but I think I'll just expand it out to a general rule as to how long would we expect in order to get a response from USDA on an entry.
So we need to separate out USDA from CBP agriculture. So the way the message set works, as long as it's filled out correctly and it meets all of our business and technical rules, the importer or filer will receive a may proceed from APHIS. However, CBP agriculture may take action for inspection or further review of the documentation that's been provided as far as the message set is concerned. So the importer upon, or the filer upon filing the message set will receive the APHIS may proceed. However, CBP agriculture will continue to take their actions as necessary for inspection. So the clearance may vary depending upon the port or the agriculture operations at that port.
Okay, but from a sheer USDA perspective, is there a timeline that we would expect something from them, understanding that CBP would also have, the CBP ag specialist may have a say in that, or is it all in conjunction?
So as far as the APHIS Core Message Set, the majority of commodities fall under just the technical rules and the ACE rules that are, that the ACE system enforces. So error codes and anything would be provided, those responses would be provided relatively immediately. The same with any successful, may proceed message. I think this will be covered probably later in the commodity specific webinar, but for propagative material, there may be some additional messaging from APHIS since those go to a plant inspection station. So those in the future, those, I think the messaging for that, there will be a slight difference because those are not necessarily specific driven through ACE by itself. So I would say we would leave those, we would have to answer that on the commodity specific webinar for that propagated material. But in general, for the message set that's not propagated material, the response from APHIS is relatively immediate. Again, like Ricky mentioned, the operational process to clear it can vary. Does that help answer?
Yes. Just a couple more here. First one I'll go with is, will we be able to file a standalone APHIS message set, much as there is a standalone for FDA?
Brett, you can correct me if I'm wrong. FDA, I believe, has their own, I believe that it's only a prior notice or something else. Don't hold me to that, but I believe FDA uses their own system to receive their PGA data. So one can go outside of ACE to submit the FDA PGA data. However, for APHIS Core, our PGA data collection is only through ACE. So one has to submit the APHIS Core PGA data through ACE through the process for submitting data through ACE, which would likely require some additional data entries, whatever's required for ACE on top of what is already required for the APHIS Core. Does that help answer the question?
That's correct. That's correct. We, you would have to file. You can't file a standalone for APHIS Core. However, similar to what FDA allows, we do have the APHIS LACI, and it does have a separate standalone way of filing for LACI. But for the APHIS Core, it isn't a standalone. It will come with the entry in line.
Okay, great. So we have time for one more question here, and then we'll let you go. But thank you again for your participation. And so just an expansion on the standalone module, or maybe a similar question to that is, will USDA allow and expect corrections to data that has already been transmitted if inadvertently something was transmitted incorrectly?
Yes. During this transition period, we expect there to be a learning curve for everyone involved. We'll be accepting corrections when we begin enforcing it. August 2020, we would be accepting corrections up until arrival. So post-arrival, we would not be accepting any PGA data corrections.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to take this opportunity to conclude today's webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining, and a very, very warm thank you to the APHIS ACE team for putting together today's webinar. I think our members will find it very valuable. And as a reminder, we will send out the presentations and links to the recordings and whatever you need from the webinar. But most importantly, our next webinars will contain product-specific information. So for those that had questions about product-specific information, please attend those webinars. The next one is related to fruits and vegetables. It is scheduled for 1 week from today at 1 p.m. Eastern on February 12th. Thank you again for your participation, and I hope you have a wonderful day.